One of the most powerful things about AI agent frameworks like Eliza are the ability to build out custom plugins. Plugins allow you as a developer to build out and integrate any type of custom functionality that you can imagine and make it available for the agent workflow, but also for any developer using the agent framework in the future. This is really powerful and important for a few different reasons. First of all, if you're a developer, this vastly expands the type of agent that you can build because you can now be extremely creative and build out really any idea that you can possibly imagine. If you have a software product that you would like to get in the hands of developers, this is a very good distribution mechanism because you have literally tens of thousands of developers using these agent frameworks, and they can enable a plugin with just a couple of lines of code and maybe just an environment variable. Also, if you're a developer looking to find work, there's just a massive amount of opportunity right now in the agent space. There are tons of people looking for developers to build agents, and even more demand is there for people building out custom integrations and plugins and things like that. So once you learn how to do this, this just adds another tool to your toolbox and allows you to kind of be more creative with the things that you can build. What we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be starting from scratch, and we're going to be building the whole plugin from 0 to 1. That means we're going to be starting with a brand new project. We're going to be creating our folders. We're going to be creating our files, and we're going to be running it. The plugin that we're going to be creating is going to be integrating the NASA API. The NASA API has a lot of different features that we can use. We're just going to start with a subset of those. But by the end of the video, you should have a really good understanding of how all of this works and the design patterns of building a plugin. And then you can go and build out really anything that you would like. For AI inference, I'm going to be using Hyperbolic, a team that I've been working closely with at EigenLayer. They provide a lot of different AI services, but for us, we're going to be using their inference as a service where they offer kind of like a suite of different models that you can use on demand. They have models like DeepSeek, different versions of Llama. We're going to be going with just the basic version of Llama, and then for you, you can kind of choose whatever model that you would like if you don't want to go with the one that we use in this tutorial. All of the code, resources, and links are going to be provided to you below, either on YouTube or X in the post. That way you can copy and paste and code along without running into any mistakes, because we're going to be doing a lot of coding in a very short amount of time. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive into our terminal and start writing some code. So I'm in my terminal. I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory, and I'll call this new NASA Eliza plugin, or whatever you would like to call this. I'm going to go ahead and change into this directory, and we're going to clone the Eliza repo. So you can go to the Eliza website and click on GitHub, or you can go directly to their GitHub repository. And I'm going to go down here where we clone the latest release, or I would say clone the repo and then check out the latest release. And I'm going to go ahead and clone this into the local directory that I'm in now. Once this has been cloned, we're going to go ahead and check out the latest release. All right, so we've checked out the latest release, and we're going to go ahead and open this up in our text editor. Just zoom in a little bit here. So the plugins and all the other packages are here under this packages directory. So what we want to do is essentially create a new directory there. So I'm going to go ahead and change into the packages directory, and here you can kind of see all the plugins. So what we're going to do is we're going to say make directory plugin -NASA. And we're going to go ahead and change into that directory. So we're here, we're in our new fresh directory. We have nothing at the moment. To get started, we want to go ahead and create a couple of files. We're going to need a package.json. We're also going to need to set up a couple of things for our TypeScript, because we're going to be writing this in TypeScript. So we're going to also need to have a tsconfig.json. And we're going to need a tsup.config.ts. This is for bundling the TypeScript after it's been compiled. So we're now set up with these 3 files here, we're going to go ahead and make a directory for our source code, src. We're going to change into that new directory. And here we're going to go ahead and create all the basic files we're going to need to write later. So we're going to need 5 files here. So we're going to need index.ts. That's going to be our entry point. We're going to need to have some types. We're going to need to have our examples, which we'll go over in just a moment. We're going to need to have our services, which is going to be our API calls, how they're configured. And we're going to need an environment that is going to be how we fetch the environment variable for the NASA plugin. We're also going to need one last directory in here called actions. And these are going to be our 2 actions that the NASA plugin is going to do. The 2 actions that we're going to kind of enable, one of them is going to be getting pictures from Mars and from the different rovers, and the other is going to be getting the astronomy picture of the day from NASA. So I'll create 2 actions for those 2 things. I'll say get apod.ts for the astronomy picture of the day, and I will call the Mars rover photo get Mars rover photo.ts. Okay, so we've just now created a bunch of different files and folders. Okay, cool. So we're back here. We have 2 different terminals open. One is with our base project, and one is with our newly created actions and stuff for our NASA plugin. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our text editor, and now we can go to plugin NASA. And we can see that we have everything we have here. So the first thing we want to do is set up our package.json. This is going to be mainly focused around our dependencies. Obviously, there's a lot of other configuration that you kind of just need to have set up here. And a lot of this is very consistent across all the other plugins. So you can kind of see into other plugins some of the entry points and things like that. But the main things to really kind of check out here are going to be that we're just adding the reference to Eliza core. We're adding TSUP for bundling our TypeScript, and we're adding Zod, and then we have a couple of like peer dependencies and dev dependencies. So that's our package.json. This is going to be just for setting up our project. We're going to go ahead and set up our TypeScript config. And this is just going to extend the TypeScript config that we already have set up for the core project, setting up a couple of different things around our compiler options, and including like the src folder. And then we'll go ahead and set up our TSUP configuration, or TSUP, I'm not even sure how you say that. Has all the really basic stuff that we're going to need for compiling, and it kind of mentions some of the dependencies that we're using. All right, so all of the base configuration is kind of done, and this is kind of really all we need to kind of get started to start writing the actual code for the plugin. So what I'm going to do, though, to kind of make sure that when we're writing our code we don't give any compiler errors, is I want to go ahead and install all of the dependencies. So you're going to notice that when I run pnp install that this is going to throw an error. It's going to say you cannot install with frozen lock file because there is like a pmp dot lock that has all the different dependencies laid out exactly. So what we can say is pnpm install -- help, and you'll see that there is a let's see here, fix lock file, a flag that we can pass in. So what we're going to say is pnpm install, and we're going to say fix lock file. And this will fix the error there for the lock file. All right, now that we have all of our dependencies installed, we can build the project by running pnpm build. And I probably need to do this actually from the top level here. So we'll run this again, pnpm build. All right, so the build is done, and when we go back and open up some of our files here, you'll notice that there is no longer like a compile or a syntax highlight error there, because we've now installed our dependencies and everything is kind of available for our code editor. So what we want to do now is start setting up all these files here. And I think a good place to start might be our types. And we don't really have that many types that we're going to be setting up. We have 2 types for the different responses that we're getting from the Mars API. So we have an astronomy picture of the day response and a Mars rover data response. So before we dive into that code, let's look at the Mars API real quick. So if you go to the Mars API website, you can just Google this, it'll come up. You can see here that you can generate an API key, and that's what I've done, and it just emails you the API key, and then you can start using it in your app, and I believe you get like 1,000 requests, looks like per hour, so pretty decent for something like this. And then you can go down here to see the different APIs, and we're using the APOD, astronomy picture of the day, and we're also using the Mars rover. So these are the 2 different APIs that we're using. And if you want to test them out, you can just like click here and you can see that it gives you like an example query. So if I just open this example query, it shows you that the response comes back there. And that's kind of it. So if you wanted to kind of know what the interface of that response looks like, that's essentially what we're getting back. And that relates very closely to this type here. This type here for Mars rover, it's something we're creating kind of custom because we only need a few different values, and I didn't want to include all the other stuff we're not going to use to make it more confusing. So for types, we need those 2 types, and that's it. So I'll go ahead and save that and close it. The next thing we might open up is our index, and this is essentially the entry point for the plugin, and also the structure for what a plugin like is kind of right here, where we have this a type of plugin where you have the different fields. The only fields we're going to be filling in are name, description, and actions. And the actions are an array of different actions that this plugin supports. We're doing the Get Astronomy Picture of the Day and Get Mars Rover action plugin. And then you can also do these evaluators and providers, which we're really not doing. They just allow you to do a lot more custom functionality for your plugin. I've written a couple of notes here to kind of give you an idea. Evaluators analyze the situations and actions taken by the agent. They run after each agent action, allowing the agent to reflect on what happened. And then the providers run during or before the actual action gets called. So let's say we called the Mars rover action, and before that ran, we wanted to go and like fetch some information from another API or something. We could kind of do that and provide different context and ways for that to be done. So that's the plugin, and what we need to now do is define these 2 actions. So we'll do that in just a moment, but for now, we'll just go ahead and close this file. So we have our index and our types. The next thing we'll just do real quick is our examples. And examples are pretty straightforward. I'm going to kind of minimize these 2. So we have these 2 example arrays, one for Get Mars rover examples and one for Get APOD examples. These are just an array of like conversational types of things that you might expect this action to be triggered by. So here I have one conversation that might say, I wonder what Mars looks like today. And then this will call the NASA Get Mars rover photo action, which is the action that we're about to create in just a moment. And then we have this NASA Get APOD action that will be triggered when we ask things like, what's the NASA astronomy picture of the day? I love space. I'm in love with space and time and space travel and different things like this. And you can kind of like create what the conversation flow might look like. So these can be up to you how you want to do that. I just provided a few. Sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't, but they seem to work pretty good so far. So we have the 2 array of examples here, and we're done. We can save that. The next thing we're going to do is set up this environment function. And this is a function helper that we're going to be calling from within the action to check to make sure that we have our environment variables set and also to return those environment variables. So really the main functionality of this file is just happening right here, where we're saying const configuration or const config is set to an object with the NASA API key, and we're setting that to runtime.getSetting NASA API key. And then we basically return that from this function. And then we're going to use this validate NASA config function elsewhere. And then if there's an error, we just kind of throw an error. And then finally, we have this services file, which is going to be the most code that we're going to be seeing in all of this. But if I really kind of distill this down as well, it's not a whole lot going on either. Let's get down to the main two functions that we have here. We have the main service, which returns two functions. One is get astronomy picture of the day. The other is get Mars rover photo. So get astronomy picture of the day basically just calls the API at https:/api.nasa.gov/planetary/apod, and then passes in the API key. And that's kind of it. And if that works, it returns the data in JSON formats. And if it does not, it just throws an error. So very simple service, that one is. This service is a little bit more complex, but also fairly simple. We're calling this fetch Mars photos function for get Mars rover photo. And I encapsulated that function separately because there's a recursive aspect to it, because sometimes this will return an empty array. So I kind of do another attempt if there's an empty array, up to 10 attempts. I've never seen it go past like 1 or 2 attempts. It should resolve after 1 or 2. So anyway, so we have get Mars rover photo, which calls get Mars photos. This has a couple of different rovers that we can choose from. So there was actually 3 rovers: the Curiosity, the Opportunity, and the Spirit. I noticed that the Spirit was really returning very inconsistent results, so I got rid of Spirit. And then I noticed that the Opportunity was also not really returning the best response. So I then took the Opportunity out of this object here, and I'm only using Curiosity. You might want to play around with this more and add Opportunity as well, but for now, the only rover that I'm returning is Curiosity. And we have a couple of variables that we need for each rover. We have the max sol, which means the max number of days that we can query from, because this is like how many days the rover has been on Mars. And then we have the different cameras. Each rover has different cameras, front, back, whatever, and they have different names. So we're kind of like combining the different cameras with the max sol, which is the date, with the rover, and then we're kind of like getting a dynamic version of the photo. So we'll say, let's get this rover on this camera on this day. And every time we call this, it kind of combines all of that together and gives us like a random photo. And that's what this logic here is doing, and here. And then we compose our URL based on the rover name, the day, and the camera. And that's pretty much it. Fairly straightforward. And then this is where we're kind of checking to see if the array that it returns is empty, then we just like recursively call the function again. If there are photos, we just return this object that has a photo, a day, a camera, and a rover name. And then we're going to use that in our application or in our agent. So that's the most code we're going to look at. I feel like it's pretty straightforward though. And then the last thing we're going to look at are the 2 actions. So we have 2 actions. One is for get Mars rover photo. And this is going to be using that service that we just created. This is the actual like meat of what an action is. So this is kind of an important file here. We have a couple of different properties here. We have a name, which is a string. We have similes, which is an array. We have a description. We have a validate function. We have a handler function. The name is pretty obvious. This is the action name that we're going to be referencing, and we've already referenced elsewhere in our examples. Similes are kind of like similar ways that this might be called, or this might be like invoked in different other contexts. The validate function makes sure that we have our environment variable set, so this actually works. And then the handler is just our custom logic that injects different things into the runtime, or I would say from the runtime and from the current context, I would say, of the agent, and makes it available here for us to use. So the state object has a lot of different information available to you. The runtime has the environment variable for that, whatever service that we want to use available. So we're kind of only using really the runtime, and then we're also using this callback. Callback is also a very important thing to understand how it works. Depending on where this agent is invoked from, the callback will call back to a different callback function, I guess you could say. So if you're using this from the web interface, the callback function will return a response to the user in the web UI. If this callback function is called from the Twitter API, it will be called back into a Twitter response. If you're calling this from Discord or Telegram, that's where that callback will come from. So that's just something to keep in mind. But it's really nice because you can just invoke the callback with whatever you would like, and wherever this is being called from gets returned there. So you don't have to write a bunch of different like logic for each individual, I would say, like way it's being called. We're just going to write it here once, and you're going to see that we're going to be using this action both in the web interface as well as the Twitter interface, which is pretty nice. Okay, so in terms of the actual service being called, it's very simple. We're just saying get Mars rover data is going to call the NASA service .get Mars rover photo. And then we're invoking the callback function with a string of text that says, here's the photo from Mars rover.rover with the day and the camera. And then we're setting the photo. What I would like to ultimately do is maybe embed this using, an actual data URI or something like that, but I didn't have time to kind of get that to work. So right now it's just returning a link to the photo, which is still fine, I think. So that's the Get Mars rover photo. And then the last thing is the Get astronomy picture of the day. Very similar to what we just looked at, so we won't go over all that. We'll just point out that we have the NASA Get APOD as the name. We have the similes. We have the description here. We have the same validate and handler function, and very similar in terms of like how all this stuff works. We're just validating, making sure it all is set up with our environment variables. We call the service and we invoke the callback function, passing in some text here. All right, so that's all that we need to do there. And really, we've done everything that we kind of need to do in terms of getting our plugin working. The only other thing that we might want to do now is configure our character, because right now it's by default set to use a JSON character, but I actually like to use a TypeScript or JavaScript character because you can actually do a lot more with it dynamically. So I'm going to go here into the agent folder, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new file in the src folder called natter.character.json. And here in natter.character.json, I'm just going to go ahead. And actually, this needs to be not .json. It needs to be .ts. So in this character, I'm just going to go ahead and drop in a character file that I have. Okay, so this is just essentially the same thing you would see in any of the JSON characters. So I'm going to minimize all of these different things. So if you go into the characters folder here, you'll see that there's a bunch of characters available. This is basically the same exact thing, except I'm using TypeScript or JavaScript instead of JSON. Why this is important is because here you might want to do things like add additional clients by using the typed version of these. So you can kind of like type in clients dot and see all the different things that are available, which is a lot nicer, I think, than using JSON. And then you can do the same thing with the models. So you can look and see that you have access to all these different models. And I'm just saying model provider name .hyperbolic. Another thing that you can do here is also use your plugins. So there's two ways to kind of integrate a plugin in the way that we have this set up now. You can either go into the agent.ts file here, and you'll notice that there's like an array of plugins that will be enabled if there is a secret set. But I think more interestingly is to kind of like do it this way, because this is kind of how most people are going to be using plugins. So we're going to say imports from, and we want to point to our plugin here. So the way that we want to kind of understand how to write that would be maybe to go to our package.json and see that we have like all these different dependencies that are also plugins. So you would say something like at Eliza OS/plugin NASA. At the moment, this isn't going to show up because we need to actually run this build, and also we need to, I believe, add our plugin here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to say plugin-NASA. And now we need to go ahead and run the build for this to actually show up here as being available. But before we do that, the last other thing we need to do is actually make this character file available in our index file. So we're going to take this NASA plugin, we're going to drop it here, and then we're going to go ahead and open our index.ts file here. And we're going to go here to the top. And let's go ahead and import main character, which is what I export from here. And we want to find instances of default character, and we want to replace that with main character. And I'm going to delete this code here because it's basically saying if you pass in a character to the command line, then to use what's there, but we're not doing that. We're just going to be using this main character. I guess we don't need that as well. Well, that's fine. We'll just leave that for now. But now we're loading the main character from this character file here. So I'm going to go back to my command line here, and we're going to go ahead and get set up to kind of build this. But the one thing we still haven't done, if you have noticed, is that we haven't set our environment variables. And for our environment variables, we need to go ahead and have those things set so we can access Hyperbolic, so we can access the NASA API, and so we can access Twitter as well. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and open up .env.example, and I'm going to create a new file called .env. And I'm going to copy .env.example into .env. And this is just what comes by default, with Eliza. So we have now a new NASA configuration. So we need to say NASA, and then we're going to say NASA API key. And then if you remember, we actually use this NASA API key here in our environment file here. So we need that. We also need our Twitter stuff. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and pull up all of the different credentials and put them at the top of the file so we can have it all there together. So I'm going to need Twitter username, Twitter password, Twitter email, NASA API key. And if you remember, we're also using Hyperbolic. So I guess I'll just take all this stuff here and I'll put it there. Now, I obviously can't set up my API key, my password, or any of this other stuff here. But all you have to do is kind of like say, my NASA API key is this. My username is like that. Password, email, all these different things. The thing I will set here in this tutorial, though, is this Hyperbolic model to kind of show you how this works. So I'm going to open up Hyperbolic dashboard here. I'll pick out this llama model here. And for the model name, you'll kind of see it referenced here. So I'm just going to copy this meta llama, whatever here. And I'm going to paste it right there. So this is the model that I'm going to use. And then I'm going to close the screen or turn the camera off and just go ahead and fill out the username and password and API keys. And then I'll be right back. Okay, so my environment variables are set. I want to go back to my command line and I want to run pnpm install. And I'll say fix lock file just in case. All right, so installation has been done, and this should have basically installed, I believe, the NASA plugin into the agent folder. Next, we'll run pnpm build again. Looks like build was successful. And now is for the moment of truth, we want to run this. So we're going to run pnpm start. And it looks like I ran into an error because my environment variables are in the wrong folder. They're under characters. I need to move these into the main path. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to retry this. All right, going ahead and run pnpm start again. All right, looks like it's running successfully. So what we want to do is open up our Twitter profile for the agent that we're working with here. So I'm going to go to my Twitter profile for Soundcraft, and it looks like it just tweeted out something. So if I kind of like copy this text and I search for it here, you'll see that it kind of matches. So that looks like it's working. What we want to do now is test out the plugin, obviously. So I'm going to run pnpm start client. And this is going to open up our web interface, which is localhost 5173, which is right here. Actually, 51. There we go. All right, so that's our agent. I'm going to click chat, and I'm going to just say hello world. And it looks like the chat is working. So I'm going to say, I love space. How can you help me? And see if our agent will actually invoke our plugin. Okay, awesome. It's saying, would you like to see a current photo from the NASA astronomy database or perhaps a picture from Mars rover? Yes, a picture from the astronomy database would be awesome. And boom, it says, here's the picture of the day. It gives us the URL for that. And if we open it up, boom, we see the picture of the day. That's amazing. Okay, now let's test this out on Twitter. So I'm going to open up Twitter, I guess, and my man handle here. And I'll go ahead and say, can you show me a picture of space? And I'm going to go ahead and like open up the terminal to see this action hopefully being invoked in the terminal as it happens. All right, if we go back to Twitter, we can see that our agent has responded. Here is a NASA astronomy picture of the day. And it looks like it responded with the same thing twice. I'm wondering how we can fix that. But for now, at least we have the agent working. So if I go ahead and click that, you see that the picture has shown up and our agent invoked the action based on a conversation that we had on Twitter. Needs a little bit of polishing to kind of figure out why the exact content was posted twice, but I'm pretty sure it's something minor. So that's it. I know that was a lot of code, but you can copy and paste everything I wrote. I'm going to be sharing all of the code for you below. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me. Also, please, if you like this video, comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff. And let me know what you want to see next. Thanks.